So good evening, everyone, and welcome. For those who don't know me, I'm Alison Vickery. I'm a member of the board of the directors of the Alberta Lymphedema Association. And in honor of World Lymphedema Day on March 6th and Lymphedema Awareness Month, which is the month of March, we as an association are very happy to have you here today for our first Lymphedema night of 2022. Diane, I will pass off to her in a moment to do a formal introduction for Dr. Gibson, but first I did want to make a few quick announcements. Firstly, we are looking for some backup volunteers still for our casino days, which are on April 5th and 6th. So if you're available to be a backup volunteer, in case we have someone cancel, please email Diane. I will put her email in the chat. Secondly, we currently have a jewelry fundraiser going on with Park Lane Jewelry, and 50% of the money from all sales is going directly back to ALA. So I'll put the link to that in the chat as well, in case you want to check out the catalog. I'm sure you will find something that you like. And finally, we do still have some spots to fill on the ALA board, specifically for individuals with knowledge and experience in governance. So if that interests you, check out the role description, which I'll post in the chat as well. The last thing that I wanted to point out is the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you type your questions in there, we can keep track of them better than just posting them in the chat, and we'll have a short question and answer period with Dr. Gibson after the presentation. If at any point you'd rather ask your question verbally instead of via text, just click the raise hand button and then Diane can unmute you. So Diane.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison, and welcome to everyone. Just so you know, this is being recorded. We can't see you at the moment unless you're going to talk later on with question and answers. So just be mindful of that. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Gibson. He graduated from the University of Toronto and arrived at the University of Alberta from the University of Manitoba. He has many peer-reviewed publications. Dr. Gibson is the first Diane and Irving Kipnes Chair in Lymphatic Disorders at the University of Alberta. He will head research to support the care of patients suffering underreported, underrecognized, and underdiagnosed medical problems in the lymphatic system, such as lymphedema. His focus is to define the signal transduction pathways leading to cell death or survival in lymphedema and cancer. He will also establish a translational research program and lymphedema research network in Alberta to improve the lives of lymphedema patients. Dr. Gibson's research team, which he hopes to make up of physicians, oncologists, massage therapists, and other scientists, will be able to learn more about lymphedema and new ways to treat it. And I hope that Dr. Gibson will call out to us as well to help if he needs extra help. So please welcome Dr. Gibson.
So thank you for that kind introduction. I am the first Diane and Irving Kipnes Endowed Chair in Lymphatic Diseases at the University of Alberta. And in the next couple of slides, I want to give you my vision for what I think lymphedema research will be in the province of Alberta within the next 5 years or so and beyond. During this introduction, you talked about my training, and I just wanted to get you a flavor as how I've moved around in my career over the years. So I was born in Sudbury, Ontario, which is a mining town. My dad was a miner within the nickel company in Sudbury. And I went to school there until university, and I went off to Ottawa, where I got my bachelor's of science and got the bug for health science research, where I did my Ph.D. at the University of Toronto in the Department of Clinical Biochemistry. Now, within the first 3 years of my Ph.D., my supervisor decided that he wanted to move to the States and gave me the option of starting my Ph.D. from scratch again after 3 years, or move with him to the States where I can complete my PhD where he moved to. Obviously, I moved to the States with him, and he went to Houston, Texas at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I completed my PhD degree in T-cell cancers. And in Houston, I actually met my wife, so it actually worked out great. Now, after I graduated, I went to the National Jewish Medical and Research Center in Denver, where I continued my research on mechanisms of cancer and treatment. And through that research, I got recruited to the University of Manitoba and at Cancer Care Manitoba, where I set up my lab for the next 20 years, looking at mechanisms of cancer and treatment, and in particular in leukemia. Then I was recruited to the University of Alberta this year to start the lymphatic disorders research program that it was kindly introduced. So my expertise, and I'm trying not to get any technical words here. So basically my research program is centered around the idea of understanding how a cell lives and how a cell dies. It can't do both at the same time. Either you're alive or you're dead. So in a cell, they have signals that will decide if the cell should survive or die depending upon the environment it is in. So the easiest example I can have is a lung cell will survive in the lungs and prosper. But if you take that lung cell and put it to the kidney, it will die. And that's because it's not getting the correct signal within the environment, and that it will then favor cell death because it's not supposed to live in that environment. Now, this translated really well for cancer research because cancer cells survive in areas in which they're not supposed to. And how this relates to the lymphatic system is that in a particular leukemia called chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL for short, it survives in lymph nodes within a person and grows to a point where it actually outcompetes other immune cells within the body. And then patients become immunocompromised and die from infections and other related illnesses. So my interest is to figure out why these cells survive, and then can I activate cell signaling in these cells to bring them into cell death, and then I would be able to do combination therapies on patients. And so this was great, and I had a lot of model systems that I used and cell lines. But at some point during my research, I realized that if I wanted to impact the lives of patients, just doing research in the lab wasn't good enough. I needed to have a way of translating it to the person. And people describe this as translational research or bench to bedside, where you go from the research within a lab to actually doing research on patients within the clinic. And I talked to physicians, and I created a program that was associated with translational research. But at the time, I was a little naive. And this picture, as you can see here, has a lab at one side of the valley and the patient on the other, and this bridge that crossed this valley. And it's a pretty rickety bridge, actually. And if you fall down, you die at the end. And they called this translational bridge the Valley of Death. And the reason why they called it the Valley of Death was because there was really little funding available for these connections between the bench and the patient. There was a lack of infrastructure to actually incorporate patients in the research that I was conducting. And beyond that, there was a lack of communication. Scientists are in the dark room within the lab that no one should see and never know where it is. And the patient areas are the bright areas where physicians and nurses and care staff care for the patient, and the two shall never meet. Well, we needed to figure out how to communicate with each other and to have them meet if we wanted to improve the lives of patients within the clinics. And in particular, this would be at Cancer Care Manitoba. So what I did was I became Director of Translational Research for Cancer Care Manitoba, and I created these pillars of research that were ongoing within the Cancer Center. Basic is the basic science that's going on in the lab, which was represented by myself. Clinical is the research that's been going on in the patient areas. This could be clinical trials, or it could be clinical observation studies, but it would be in the patient's clinics that this research would have. And then there's another form of research, which is called population health, where you have scientists that look at population-based data from data collected across the province or across countries, and do analysis in terms of patient outcomes and other related associations associated with their disease or their overall health. None of these researchers actually interacted in any significant way. And what I did with the translational program is that I made the patient the center of the research, where they would consent to be part of research studies. And based upon that, we'll give access to physicians for clinical information to be associated with research, blood samples to basic scientists so that they can study the biology of the disease, and population health researchers so that we can connect these patients to the overall patient population that they would never actually know exists. And so we started this in leukemia. So chronic lymphocytic leukemia was the first patients that we enrolled in this program at Cancer Care Manitoba. And again, the patient is in the center. And it's surrounded by projects that we had that involved clinicians, nurses, basic scientists, and population-based scientists that would involve novel technologies, improving patient management, optimizing their care, as well as developing new targets for treatment, such as metabolism in this case. But none of this would be possible if you didn't have the infrastructure surrounding it. So we had programs in which all the CLL patients went to one clinic where we would see them and consent them for research. We had a CLL biobank here that we stored the blood samples for research that can be done in the future. We connected their clinical data to population databases and connected that to their blood samples so that we will be able to make broader conclusions. And connecting all these together was Cancer Care Manitoba, which was the provincial healthcare system that delivered care to cancer patients in Manitoba. Over time, this program grew, and we had a wide variety of different researchers working together, trainees, nurses, the whole spectrum from undergraduate students to physicians and Ph.D. scientists. We had an immunologist that was part of our team. We've had oncologists who actually treated CLL patients as part of the team. We had basic scientists who were looking at fundamental aspects of leukemia biology, and population-based scientists that were looking at the overall population and connecting it to what we were all doing. And I was the head of it, trying to connect all these elements together so that everything that was done can inform the team on what new question we needed to do moving forward. So during my time in Manitoba, I was director to this program that grew from just looking at CLL to being involved in prostate, breast cancer, colon cancer, and ovarian cancer. I then became provincial director of research for Cancer Care Manitoba for a brief period of time, and then the director of the Cancer Center for Cancer Care Manitoba, where we directed research across these areas that I was talking about. So population health, clinical research, as well as basic. And I was the head of the CLL cluster team, where we brought people together specifically looking at CLL. And finally, I became the Prairie Node lead for the Terry Fox Research Institute, bringing together researchers not just in Manitoba, but across Saskatchewan and Alberta for cancer research that is sponsored by the Terry Fox Research Institute. So you might have the question, why Alberta? Why did I move from Manitoba? Well, all those roles that I was in were for a limited time. In other words, I've been there, done that. So this opportunity came in which I could create a new leadership role within lymphatic disorders within the province of Alberta and beyond, in an area that has been underserved for many, many years, and there's lots of questions that remain unanswered. I can develop a new translational research program based upon my experience in leukemia to see if I can develop a team here in Alberta and to create a larger team nationally to answer some of the important questions about how to treat lymphatic disorders such as lymphedema and the biology behind them. And by doing this, I will be able to create national networks with my knowledge with Terry Fox Research Institute, as well as with the CLL network, so that we can be able to answer new questions that we wouldn't otherwise be able to answer. Beyond that, it gives me freedom to do research instead of writing for money. And what do I mean by that? A basic scientist has to have money in order to do the research. To do this, we have to apply to funding agencies for money to do the research, in which it gets peer-reviewed and awarded, which is great. You want to make sure that you do the best research that's possible. The problem is that there's only 20% of grants get funded in any given moment in time. So during the year, if I write 10 grants, I will only get 2 of them funded, and which creates a cycle in which I would spend approximately 1/3 of my time writing for money and not doing the research that was in my lab. And so by coming here and creating this program, it gave me the freedom, because of the startup package they gave me, that I can actually do research. And finally, but not least, that this gives me the opportunity to impact the lives of patients, such as lymphedema patients. So where are we today? I'm at the University of Alberta. I'm in the Cates Research Center, and I've established a lab there where we're going to be looking at lymphatic cells and how they respond to stress. Because in lymphedema, what happens in the majority of cases is that there is some sort of injury that happens to the lymphatic system that leads to swelling and lymphedema. But why does one person with one injury get lymphedema and a other person that has pretty much the same injury may not get lymphedema at all? Well, there must be a difference in how that lymphatic system responds to stress. And there's very little known about it. And using my expertise in survival and cell death, I'm going to ask the question, how do lymphatic cells actually respond to stress towards cell survival or cell death under different environments? And then apply this to animal models and to 3D models that we've developed to see if this correlates with the disease. I will also establish a translational research program where we'll reach out to lymphedema patients, get blood samples from them, not just at one time, but over time. So as these patients go through treatments, we'll get a sample before treatment and after. Also, in cancer patients, we will be getting blood samples before and after treatment, and then follow them. And if they develop lymphedema, to ask the question, is there any differences in these patients that develop lymphedema to patients who don't, that have gone through cancer therapy? So this is the model that I envision that I want to be able to do here in Alberta, where the lymphedema patient is the center, where I will have my research program looking at the balance between cell survival and cell death. We will develop, with collaboration with other groups, animal models for lymphedema. We will create clinical databases for lymphedema patients, as well as work with Alberta Health Services and the Cross Cancer Institute in order to develop samples from lymphedema patients, as well as work with physicians, as well as the physiotherapists, to define the questions that need to be answered and hopefully lead to clinical trials or new treatment modalities that will improve the lives of patients with lymphedema. That's the vision. The bigger vision is that we want to connect researchers together. So it's just not my lab doing all the research, but that we will collaborate with people at the University of Calgary who work in lymphedema models, clinics that are private within the province, such as the Solaris Lymphedema Clinic, work with Alberta Health Services and Cross Cancer Institute with physicians and physiotherapists, as well as researchers at the University of Alberta. And just recently, I had contact from the University of Saskatchewan, where there was a researcher that was interested in developing new models for lymphedema research in zebrafish of all things. So we're going to be collaborating with them to see if we can develop new models in this area as well. So that's really everything that I wanted to talk to you about today, about my vision, how I came here, and where we're going. And I'll be more than happy to take questions. Lastly, I'll just like to say that I've hired 5 people in my lab right now. I have a lab manager, I have 2 graduate students, a research associate, and a clinical coordinator that's going to be running the translational studies that I've described. And here is their picture with my lab. Thank you so much, and I will be more than happy to take questions.
So our first one is, how long does it take to set up a program like this?
Well, in the middle of a pandemic, it took a little longer than what I actually anticipated. So there's always challenges, but we are already up and running in terms of our basic science. So there's data being generated as we speak. Since this summer, I've been able to establish my lab within the first couple of months in getting reagents and everything in place. The translational side has been a little bit more challenging, as you can imagine, that we have to get regulatory approvals from not just the university and the provincial ethics boards, but also the individual institutions that patients deal with, such as the Cross Cancer Institute or the University Hospital would be another one that we would have to get institutional approval from. And access to medical records. So all of that, we're almost there. I would say in the next month, we will have all the approvals, and then we will be able to launch the translational studies in April. So that kind of gives you an idea of how we are starting. And the fruits of this will take place between now, within the next 2 to 3 years, we will have results that we will be able to publish.
Awesome. Okay. The next 2 questions are both about the patients that you'll be recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one from Elizabeth is, how will you be recruiting patients? And then Catherine added or asked, lymphedema is not exclusively related to cancer and cancer treatment. So will you be inclusive of those other patients? For example, the Chris Clinic in Edmonton.
Great question. So the first part of that question is that we're going to be including 3 clinics. We're going to be including the clinic at the Cross that's run by Margaret Manili. We are going to have the Chris Clinic at the Misericordia Hospital or something close to that. Will be the second clinic that we will be including. And we'll have a private clinic, the Solaris Lymphedema Clinic that is close to the university. So we were going to have a mix, and they're all forms of lymphedema. So there will be cancer related, there will be lower body lymphedemas, as well as ones associated with surgery, such as hip replacements.
Amy asked, in the lymphedema translational studies program, what does that look like? Will there be courses for different disciplines or master's program?
Oh, well, unfortunately, there won't be a formal training program for lymphedema. This will be through the traditional training methods of the university. So we will have graduate students through the graduate studies program at the University of Alberta come to my lab, and I'm associated with the Department of Oncology within the University of Alberta, where they will be trained in this area. There will be just normal courses, but one of the things that maybe down the road that we would entertain is that we will take some of this knowledge and incorporate it into some of the training courses for medical personnel as well as graduate students down the road. But as of right now, no, there won't be any formal training per se.
Okay, there's no more questions coming in right now. Remember that you can put, oh, there is some questions in the chat, I see.
Yeah.
Will you be recruiting any lymphedema patients for studies? I think you answered that. What
Yes.
about the CLL Clinic as well?
I'm sorry, can you say it again? The cows clinic?
CLL Clinic?
Cows.
That's the one at the Sheldon Schumer. They just do primary and non-secondary lymphedema.
Right.
And they've been
Okay.
open for a long time.
Well, thank you about that. I made a purpose for right now to focus on secondary lymphedema and not primary, because there's been a lot of work in that area in the past, but that in the future, once we get everything established, we'll be more than open to going in that direction.
Deb asked, how do I sign up?
Well, we have to wait, and we'll have to do it through these clinics that I talked about.
Okay. So there is a longer question here. Let's see what you think of it. Dr. Gibson, would you be able to offer an opinion of a relatively new treatment, which this person is soon going to undergo prophylactically as part of an axillary lymph node dissection called a lymphatic microsurgical preventative healing approach? What I'm hoping to find out is whether you know anything of the overall success rate of this procedure, as I have heard somewhat divergent opinions on this. Some opinions have stated that it is nearly always prevents lymphedema. Others state that the success rate is only about 70% or 75%. Have you heard anything about that treatment?
I've heard of the procedure, but I am not an expert, and I would not want to comment and say something that would be inappropriate or incorrect.
Fair enough. We can do some research too and share some findings perhaps on our side as well. Is there a plan for sharing the findings and knowledge from your research on a regular basis with the association and the public?
Yes. And so we're in early stages right now. Like, I've been in this lab for about 7 months now. But one of the things I want to do is something called knowledge translation. And that is taking the results that we've had and then take that knowledge to the end users, which would be the patients in this case. And maybe through your organization, as well as other mechanisms, having a forum or some venue in which we would have an education evening where we would present data and directions that we're going in the future. But again, it's early days.
That would be amazing. Okay, we have a couple more rolling in if you're still ready for them.
Sure.
What treatments would you be evaluating and who will do them?
Very good. Most of the treatments will be compression therapy or wrapping, but we will also be doing lymph node drainage therapy, either manual or a combination of drainage, massage, and compression. And so there will be 3 main ones that we're going to be following.
Okay. And what is the age range for research you're doing and any exclusions?
The age range is across the board. The only exclusion we had, and I kind of touched on this, is that we're going to focus on secondary lymphedema. So if there's a diagnosis of primary lymphedema, we will exclude this at this time until we move forward to say that we would do this in the future.
Okay. Sandy says, thank you so much. Very informative, and they really appreciate that you're doing this research. Ian says that the clinic in Edmonton, the Solaris, is that the same as the Salutaris?
Oh, Salutaris. I'm sorry, I pronounced it wrong. You're right.
Okay. So just a clarification there.
Yes.
Will you also be networking with some of the physiotherapy treatments in Ontario and Eastern Canada?
For the short term, no, because I want to build a network here in Alberta. So once we've established ourselves, then that's when we would reach out to people in Ontario, for example, especially in the translational studies. If we can include patients there, that will just only increase the amount of information that we can generate.
Okay. Still rolling in. So Amy asks, will you be evaluating the lymphatic microsurgeries under Dr. Kennedy at U of Calgary and other surgeons working across Canada?
Not at this time. I decided to focus on the treatment side and getting blood samples from patients and looking at cancer related because of the department I'm in. But again, I'm open to including that in the future as we develop our knowledge.
Okay. And are you planning to affiliate with any American studies maybe in the future, specifically thinking of Dr. Stanley Roxon?
Yes. Well aware of him. The answer to that is yes. I'm just getting to know these people. And so there will be a conference next year that's being organized by researchers at the University of Calgary, that they're bringing all these people in from all around the world. And I'm on the organizing committee for it. So I'm hoping to get relationships with those guys so that we can develop collaborations in the future.
Very exciting. Do patients need to be part of a clinic in Alberta to be eligible?
Yes, for now, and it has to do with the ethics and the access to clinical information. So they would have to be associated with one of the clinics in which we have ethical approval to do research on that, on my area.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Looks like that, oh, there's something else. Can you speak more to any plans you have for pharmacology drug-based research in Alberta? Are you mostly focused on drug targets through your translational clinical work for the time being?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, the knowledge that is in this area is so, what would be the right word? There's a lot of unknowns associated with it. So my focus is going to be on the basic science side to understand the biology that's going on. And then through that, get to the point where we can get targets for pharmaceutical screens and new treatments. But that's further down the line. The first one is to try to figure out what's going on and then maybe get biomarkers. And what I mean by biomarkers is clues as to who will get lymphedema and who won't, and then use that so that we can prevent it, but then take that to the next level. So I think that the next step will be the treatment pharmaceutical side, but it's going to be further down the road, unfortunately.
Okay, we have some thank yous rolling in the Q&A and in the chat. Really definitely appreciate you taking the time to answer so thoroughly all of those questions.
And on behalf of the Alberta Lymphedema Association, thank you so much for this very informative presentation. And please remember, we're here to help you as well, because what you do will affect all the lymphedema patients out there.
Yep.
And we need that. We need a researcher that's looking to help us. And I think we found him.
So it will be my pleasure. And if there's anything I can do in terms of writing about the research, and as we get up and going about connecting with patients as well, I'll be more than happy to contribute.
Yes, and we will share as soon as you're ready, let us know. We'll send it out to all our members, put it on our website to come to you. So thank you.
Perfect. So that will be amazing.